All right, welcome everybody. It is week 2. This is Editing for the Web. I'm your course director, Emily Ray, and this is your overview for the week. So in class just now, we did review some of the proposal presentations. We were taking a look at how well everybody was able to align their strategy with their site outline and their supporting wireframe. Some of the things that I've seen in the past, and not so much in the examples that we reviewed today because they were pretty stellar, is you really need to be mindful of providing an explanation of the why for your recommendations, right? Because this is what's setting you apart in your professionalism with your client. It's not just I recommend this, it's I recommend this because. And when your client understands the foundation of your recommendation, they will see the value in what you're bringing to the project. A lot of times I see not a huge and clear definition of the scope of the project, meaning that it's very nebulous, that could be misread, misconstrued, added to, or deducted from in a very easy way. Your proposal, you can look at it kind of like a checklist, right? You have documented what you were going to do for this client. And if they sign off on it at the end, they've agreed to basically what you've set forth here. At the end of the project, when they come back and they say, oh, I thought you were going to do a video for the homepage, you could say, wow, that's a fantastic idea, but if we go back and we take a look at the original proposal and estimate that you agreed on, there's no mention of a video here, but I think that that's a wonderful next step and something we should talk about for phase 2. That way you're not getting roped into something that you never agreed to in the beginning, even if it's a good idea. All right. Sometimes I see disconnections between the proposal, the sitemap, and the wireframe, meaning that something is said in the proposal that is then contradicted in the sitemap or the wireframe. For example, let's say that Rick had said he wanted a simple 5-page website that had these specific pages on it. But then I go ahead and I take a look at his sitemap where he's outlined 7 or 8 pages. And then on his wireframe, I can definitely see that there are actually 10 pages in his design. That is the disconnect I'm talking about. Your proposal should align with your sitemap, should align with your wireframe. They are all basically slightly differing ways of just conveying a more complete picture of the site that you're going to build. Now, this has nothing to do with the proposal itself, but something that I've seen in submissions last week and in the past. I've seen a lot of students who, because I ask you to post your content or your deliverable for your assignments on your blog, right? And the reason why I do that is because this class is about posting content to the web. When you're posting content to your blog, although I'm not quote unquote grading you for that act, you are giving me an indication of your ability to internalize and demonstrate your course knowledge with every blog post you make. Now, occasionally I've seen people who post this material as a download on their blog post. So instead of embedding the presentation, they might embed a video file that I then have to download and that I then have to open up and launch and watch. Or they might post a PDF of the presentation instead, or maybe even, oh no, a Word document, right? And so one of the things that I want to point out about why this is problematic is because you are giving me a poor user experience as a visitor to your blog. Instead of just putting your presentation here where I can press play and fully enjoy what it is that you've created with a single click, you've now given me hoops to jump through in order to get your content, right? And so that in and of itself is indicative to me of how well you are applying the things that you're learning in this class. Are you thinking about the people who come to your blog and how easy that you make it to engage them and to access your content? This is the kind of quote unquote meta behaviors I'm looking into when I ask you guys to post to your blog. The other area that I've seen as problematic submissions very early on that I want to just note is posting large graphics with a whole bunch of text. So now we talked about the idea of posting text as an image in that 10 Commandments lecture last week, right? And why that's problematic. Because your text is keyword-rich content that will help your content be found by search engines. When you create a picture of words, it's just a collection of pixels in the shape of letters that form words or maybe sentences. The other thing that you do, unless it's a super high quality graphic, is that text then becomes less readable. Images have a certain amount of compression in web form online because you want them to be smaller file size so they can load fast on the page, right? And so the compression in that image then makes it a little fuzzier, a little bit harder to read. So not only do you lose the search engine optimization of that, but you also lose the readability. So that's a usability issue on that. So the reason why I'm sharing kind of these additional considerations is because, again, I am recording this lecture to share with the online group. And so just because I didn't see these particular things in what we reviewed here in class, I did want to make a note on it because I do think it's important to talk about. The more you really start to think about these things, it becomes a little bit more common sense within your designs. All right. The other thing is that with the examples that were provided to you in the reference documents for this activity, the example proposals or some of the wireframes or the site maps that you were given to review, all of those things are meant to guide your own choices, not to be copied verbatim, obviously. And the reason for that is every project is going to be different. And so like what was crafted for that example might not fit the scenario that you're working on. And if it causes a disconnect with your client as to, well, this doesn't really make sense for this project that we're working on, again, you are jeopardizing your professionalism with that particular client. All right, so big question, as I like to do on occasion, just to get you guys talking and thinking a little bit. What did you guys do online today? Shout it out.
Social media.
Social media? Why, Gianni?
I don't know. I usually just go in and check there early in the morning for like Devils news and stuff.
Okay, so you were looking for some sports news.
Yeah, sports news.
All right. Killing time? Just like flipping through?
Yeah, I was on my way back from Port St. Lucie, so.
Okay, were you driving?
No.
Okay, because that sounds dangerous.
No, yeah, no social media.
Okay.
Driving.
Okay.
Yeah, just killing time.
All right. Entertainment is what you're saying.
Yeah.
All right. Jess? Nothing?
I mean, I woke up at 12 and I basically just sat there with my boyfriend and I got here. I haven't touched much.
So you haven't checked your online classes or in FSO or?
I checked FSO.
Checked FSO, all right. So checked in with your with the learning management system. Any email communications? Any? All right. So just kind of living the student life there a little bit. Mr. Dunn?
I started working on a website.
Oh yeah, started working. Was it a Real Deal Taco website?
No, actually, no. It's I kind of host a page on Facebook, and it's kind of a guy-centric page.
Okay.
I like it.
And
I think I'm in it, right?
yeah,
It's funny.
yeah, it's a guy-centric page, and I post stuff to Facebook, and it just got to the point where I started, the more I'm posting things to Facebook, I was like, all right, this is just, it's not something that's going to be a .com yet.
Okay.
It's just something that I just want to find another better place to put things.
Okay.
Instead of Facebook.
All
So
right.
I started messing with it last night at like 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
All right.
This morning, and started messing with that again. So that's kind of like.
Okay, so you're building a website and potentially moving content from Facebook platform over there. All right, I like it. I like it. Let me see what I did today. I was building a website this morning. Surprise, surprise. Definitely checking emails. definitely checking FSO for student submissions. I was looking at flights. You know, I just got like an email from Southwest that was telling me about deals, and I was like, well, let's see where they are. I mean,
Next trip.
yeah, maybe it's I don't know. I was just looking to see if there was anything interesting. Yeah, I think that was. Oh, and then I started to do a little bit of research on one of the places that Southwest was giving a cheap flight to. Not that I even really want to go, but I was just like, well, it could
Where
be
is it to?
cool. Tulsa.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. So,
I can't think of anything to do there.
well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. So, I mean, like I said, it was a dead end search probably. I think it was just something I was killing time between classes. But as you can see, these activities kind of like one leads into the next, which is where that whole web surfing thing came from years and years ago. So the reason why I ask you guys this question is just to kind of point out the diversity, right, of the things that we do online. There's so much. It's kind of cool just to shine the light on it and pay a little bit more attention to how much of our lives are spent now interacting in this environment and interacting with websites. So, you know, most times when I ask this question, I hear just quite a beautiful variety of things like reading the news, streaming music of some kind, shopping, booking a vacation, getting directions, researching something. You know, these are all things that people do online every day. And these three things, like if you were to kind of distill them into kind of three broad categories, you could say that people use the web to satisfy goals, complete tasks, or you know, get answers to their questions. Now, there's definitely overlap between these things, and some, you know, some searches or places where you spend time that definitely accomplish more than one of these. But if we were to go back here and say, okay, get directions, which does that? Probably satisfy a goal to know where you're going and maybe complete a task if there was something you had to do there. But I'm definitely getting my question answered because I'm like, how do I get to XYZ place? So you can see how that would work. Let's see, stream music. Let's say I'm just listening to Spotify. Well, maybe my goal here is just to chill, or like maybe I had some ambient music on, like as I'm trying to get some work done. So my goal is just to create a mood or an environment with that music. So you can see how you can broadly categorize all of the different things that we do into three, to three different veins here. So because we know this, right? And again, this week we're moving more from content strategy into some development practices that are based on strategy, right? We know that users want to get their answers or get answers to questions. We know that people want to satisfy tasks complete tasks and then satisfy goals. Okay, we know this. So we need to, as web strategists, which is what I call you guys this month. I know in MCBS we're notorious for calling you media strategists, but I'm taking it, just refining it a little bit more to say web strategists this month. Because we know these things about our users, we need to support them in their mission with the content that we develop, right? A little bit earlier, I asked you, what do you think is the most important content for the target audience of Real Deal Tacos? And what'd you say? Location and menu, okay? So if we know this about Real Deal Tacos, that menu and location are going to be super important to them, what might we consider with our design? Like how might we design the layout of a page to support them, knowing that their mission is, I need to know if the blackened fish taco is gluten-free. Or I need to know where are they Thursday at noon because I'm hungry. What kinds of considerations, might we do?
Yeah, I mean, you probably put the location. I would probably do an RSV for your locations right up front.
Okay, so all right, so homepage, location information right there. I like it.
Regularly.
Right? Updated by the moment.
That could tie into an app.
Could tie into an app. So basically what we're saying is if you know what people are looking for, make it easy for them, right? That's the bottom line here, is give them a smooth and intuitive path to the content they're most likely interested in. Don't make me dig for where this truck is. Don't hide the menu or call it something like services, right? Because that's not intuitive. Again, web content must anticipate user questions, right? So when we think about what kind of questions would the Real Deal Taco audience have, and then be developed or laid out to support them in their mission, or to get those questions answered, right? Or to satisfy their goals, whichever of those things it may be. All right, this requires us to know a little bit about our audience, right? Last week you guys did an activity, the competitor research. We are taking a look at how other fish taco, food trucks, or businesses in the San Diego area do what they do for their customers. You also got a client brief from Real Deal Tacos themselves that highlights some of the key characteristics and demographics of their target audience. But when you know more about this group, the better you're able to design something to support them in their goals, right? If we know that the target audience for Real Deal Tacos cares a lot about organic food, we're going to make it easy for them to know that our food is organic. If we know that a good portion of Real Deal Taco customers need gluten-free options, we're going to make sure our menu has an indication which one of these options are gluten-free, right? So again, the more we know about this audience, the better we are able to design a site that supports them, right? And so again, this week is transitioning into, we've made a strategy and a plan basically with our proposal to we're executing that. But in executing that, it's important for us to understand user behavior, things about our audience, what's important to them, and a little bit about, most user behavior online, right? And so I pose this question to you. How do people read online? Tell me, sir.
I would have to say that's a tricky question.
I know, I like to make them tricky.
Because, most people nowadays don't read online at all.
Okay, they don't read online at all. Why?
Short
It's
and
all
simple.
video. Short and simple is what Gianni says. Jess, you want to add anything to that? No. All right. It is a trick question. Thank you for cluing in on that. People don't really spend a lot of reading time online. They're mostly scanning, right? Because we're busy and we're here to get our questions answered or our tasks completed or our goals satisfied. It's not my intent as a visitor to every website I go to read every word they put on the page. I need something. Make it easy for me to find that thing, right? Don't hide it in irrelevant pages or things that are labeled in a non-intuitive way, right? Up front, right in the center. Make it easy for me, right? This becomes tricky sometimes when you think, when you're doing content development exercises, and especially working with a business, because they might think all that stuff is super important, right? Real Deal Tacos gave you a really amazing backstory. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at that in our shared Google Doc, but man, they provided all the details about how this business came to be. Do you think that that is important for the target audience of Real Deal Tacos?
I think there's some people that probably would like
Mhm.
that information.
Okay.
I think there's some locals that would frequent it. I can see a lot of people, especially in San Diego,
Mm-hmm.
because they're real close knit about
Yeah.
those things that they like.
Yeah.
Local to their area.
I would agree
They
with
probably
that.
would love to connect with the owners in that way.
Mm-hmm. So it's information that could be cool for the people who want to plug in and engage at that level, but didn't seem like that would be as important as, say, like the menu or the locations, right? Right. So now we know something a little bit more about this audience that we're trying to build a website for. Is that the backstory is important, but it doesn't rise to the importance of, say, those two things we identified earlier. Okay, so maybe I don't need to spend like a good amount of the real estate on the homepage with all of the details of the backstory. Right? Maybe it's just a little kind of 2-sentence teaser about how this truck got started and a read more link that takes me to an about page where I get more of that information. Now this is something I want to give you guys the heads up on really early on. And that is, I've given you very dense paragraphs of information in that shared Google Doc, right? But if you'll recall, in week 1, I told you, do not put dense paragraphs of text on a website. Why? All right, because I kept this slide up here for a reason. Because they don't read it, right, guys? Like, they just aren't going to read all of it. Okay, we know this about our audience, but how can we still, like, this backstory is important to the business. It's important to the brand identity. How can we use all of that information, or at least pull the essence of everything that was provided to you in that document and present it in a palatable way for this audience, right? We're going to break up that text into different paragraphs. Maybe we do a pull quote. Maybe we make sure that there are a bunch of images on this page. Maybe we go in and edit the text and streamline it to be a more efficient message. These are all things that you guys do as a web strategist. You're not a copy and paster, right? That's not what you've been hired to do on this job for Real Deal Tacos. You're not just going to open up a PDF document, highlight that text from one environment and paste it into a web page. That's not a skill, right? You are going to apply your web strategy and your ideas about how and why and where to present this information on every page that you create for this site. All right, people don't read, they mostly scan. Because of that, as the content developers for the site, we need to make sure that the content is concise, no super dense paragraphs of text that we're having to scroll for days to get through. Make sure that it's scannable. We talked about the idea of using headings, subheadings, bulleted lists to break up that text and to give a topical and relevant subject line for the paragraphs that kind of immediately follow those headings, right? Making sure that your content is timely and relevant. So, making sure that you don't have things in the copy that date it and kind of make it look obsolete. And then as objective as possible, right? Like you could write it in a very sort of flowery or promotional or biased way, but content that is a little more objective in the way that it's written instills a bit more confidence in the user. All right, so I geek out a little bit about usability because I think that the way something works is so incredibly important to our experience with using it, obviously. Now, I am a visual designer in terms of I love imagery and graphic design, but beyond that, it has to work well. And so that is where usability comes in. So there's this guy by the name of Jacob Nielsen. He's a usability expert, and he's done like tons of studies on how people, consume information online. And one of the studies that he did said that given the average time that somebody spends on a page, they have time to read at most 28% of the words on the screen, but 20% is more likely. So what this means is on any given page, the amount of time that we spend looking at that page, we can only absorb about 20% of what's going on there, right? So like as people who are designing the information that goes on these pages, like what does that tell us? There's a lot of information that's not even being picked up at all, right? Because people are busy, but they're also task-oriented or just looking for an answer to their question, right? They're not there to read every word of the backstory. They might just have wanted to know, where did this place start? And as soon as they know that it actually started in Miami, oh, cool, know it, moving on, right? So this guy, Jacob Nielsen, did another study where he did eye tracking. And so he brought a bunch of users into a lab and he tracked their eye movements as they were looking at a screen, right? And what his study revealed is that people are moving their eyes in a rough F-shaped pattern for the information on the page, where you can see in the kind of the top left corner up there is a high concentration of attention, right? And in English, because we read from left to right, you can kind of see how the eye tracking goes across the page like someone was reading it, right? But when somebody couldn't find that thing that they were looking for, that bit of information, their eyes start to do what I call the vertical scan, and in some cases the vertical plummet, right? But you can see in different areas how their eyes start to extend from left to right. Maybe they're reading a heading or a subheading or a title of that paragraph, wondering, does this paragraph contain the information that I'm looking so desperately for on this page? And so what Jacob Nielsen's study revealed is that we scan pages in a very similar way, right? Where most of our attention is being spent, in the first couple of paragraphs, reading from left to right, before our eyes just start to kind of plummet down the page looking for that thing that we're looking for. So here are some considerations. If we know, right, we are web strategists, content developers this week. If we know that this is how people check out information online, like how can we be empowered by that or informed by that with our designs, right? Okay, we know that web content is absorbed differently, so it must be developed differently. And when I say absorbed differently, I mean scanned, right? Like it's not being read word for word, right? So we should develop our content in a way that facilitates this scanning behavior, makes the scanning easy, right? The first two paragraphs should contain the most important information on the page because we know that that's where people's eyes are spending most of their time. Don't hide it in the middle of the page in a deep, dense paragraph of text. And then you should be using these information-rich keywords in your headings and subheadings, or even bulleted lists are an amazing way to grab somebody's attention while they're scanning because it's a very quick way to get a lot of information, right? It's such a simple thing, but people rarely take this stuff into account. Now, back when I gave you the 10 Commandments lecture, or that you watched it, I highlighted an example in there of me as an instructional designer, as your teacher in this class, practicing what I preach with the content that I share for you in FSO. I don't know if you remember seeing that video, but there was a super dense block of text that contained all of the information and requirements for a very important assignment. And it was so dense that it looked just like one of those word search games where you're like having to circle words in a hidden mess of letters, right? But then I showed you the example, okay, this is what this looks like afterwards when I have gone through and I have added headings and subheadings and bulleted lists and have made this an easier environment for you to scan that information, right? Because, when you're doing your checklist at the end of week 2 and you're like, oh, what did she say about like the image requirements? Guess what? Go back to that assignment, scan for the word images. You're going to find it, and then you're going to see the requirements under there. And you're welcome, right? Because that is me taking your user experience into account when I am designing for this interactive environment. Because I know that you are there to get your question answered about images and to complete a task, which is your assignment. I am supporting you in your mission for being there. Do you see how that works? It's a simple thing, like it's a paradigm shift when you start to understand that when you are developing and sharing content online, you're doing it for an audience. The best that you can support this audience and their mission for being there, the more successful your content's going to be. It should be a seamless thing. Like I highlight this stuff for you because that is the content of this class. But when I teach portfolio class and you read my assignments that I provide you in there, I don't pull up the thing and highlight how great my web and content strategy is there. I just let it be wonderful or well laid out, because that's the point, is that it shouldn't ever be like a roadblock or an obstacle for you in getting your mission completed. You should never even notice good design, right? Because it's seamless. You just go about your business getting your goals satisfied and your questions answered and your tasks completed, and nothing has ever stood in your way or made you question, right? That is the essence of web strategy, you guys. All right, this is an interactive medium, and we just spent a few minutes kind of detailing some of the meta aspects of that in an environment where we both, you and I, as students and an instructor, spend a lot of time interacting, particularly FSO. But what I want to do is just spend a minute kind of highlighting the difference between what an interactive medium, the opportunities and challenges it provides with, let's say, another medium which is not interactive, right? So I like to take a look at the difference between web and print. And we're going to be talking about some things here, kind of highlighting the differences between these two mediums. And nothing is really absolute, and when there are exceptions, I would like us to discuss and highlight them. But it's a great extension of this conversation about strategy and why you make choices for this environment versus why you make choices for another environment, right? All right, so the first kind of comparison point I want to make is that the web is digital, where print is analog. What do you think I mean by that?
Literal.
Yep.
Web is a digital format, and print is print.
Yep.
It's static.
Static. That is a very good word, and I'm glad you said it, right? And so when, yes, the web is digital, but what is the opposite of static in this regard? Movement.
The web can, like when you take a site from the computer to the phone, they have I forgot what it's called now, the process where the web page morphs.
Yeah, it's responsive.
Responsive.
Yep. Okay. So the content is able to be manipulated, basically, and it changes and it shifts, not even just in terms of, oh, let me go to the mobile version of that site now because I'm looking at it on a phone. It can be changed. Let's say I'm looking at a blog post and, oops, I've misspelled 3 things. I can just go in there really quickly and update the spelling, and I fix that. Versus, like, let's think about a printed book. Once those words and those misspellings are on that page, that's it, right? It's not easily changed. It's static at that point. That's a great word to use, Rick. The other thing to point out is the usability of the content that is shared within these mediums, right? So with digital content, I can copy and paste that text. I can then, put it in a Word document. I can right-click, save that image, bring it into my Photoshop, make a few changes, do all of this stuff, remix it, repurpose it. Like, it has life, and it is flexible enough in this digital form that I can do other things with it, right? Versus when it's printed on the page, I can do much less, right? I can highlight it in the book. I can tear pages out of the book and make paper airplanes. I can light those pages on fire for warmth when it's 70 degrees in Orlando and everybody's freezing. So you can just see that the usability of that information is rich, and it's still able to be used in different formats in a digital environment. The web is a nonlinear experience where print is more linear. What do we mean by that? Yeah.
I guess because the web allows you to jump around, as where like the print is, you don't have anywhere else to go.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great example. So the web, there's no prescribed path. There's no, like, you have to go from chapter 1 to chapter 2 to chapter 3. The way that many print books are designed. It's you are creating your own experience. I decide that I want to go to this page first, and then that page, and then to a totally different site, right? It doesn't proceed in any sort of linear progression. Versus a print book, I might go from chapter 1 to chapter 2. An exception here would be something like, let's say, an encyclopedia, where I can just skip straight to the E's for Einstein, or let's say maybe a stereo manual or something where I'm just like go to the back and like, look for that one thing that I want to look for and skip to page 35 where it's located. Of course, there are going to be exceptions. But this kind of like bleeds into the next point, where the web is a user-driven experience and print is more of an author-driven experience. So it's kind of an extension of what you just said, Gianni, that on the web you decide, right? You decide how to move through this content, at what pace, where, and versus like in a print environment, the author has decided this is the way that I want you to consume the information. And aside from things like the encyclopedia or stereo instructions, the content's not going to make sense unless you go through it the way that the author has laid it out for you, right? So there's a lot more autonomy and freedom in the way that we explore and engage information online. The web is more of an active experience, whereas print traditionally is more passive, right? I don't know about you guys, but if I'm on my computer late at night, I'm not getting super tired very fast. Like it's engaging. There's a lot of going on for our senses. It's tactile, it's visual, it's auditory. It's so many things that like we are being stimulated, by this activity online, versus print. Many times, like if we're talking about just, let's say a novel, you are generally engaging in that for entertainment or relaxation purposes, or something to kind of, I don't want to say bring you down, but like kind of make you less stimulated, right? And just engaged and focused into one thing, right? I don't know about you, but give me a book for 10 minutes at, bedtime, I'm out, right? And not because the book is boring, but just because it's the first time all day that I've only had one thing to look at, and that there's not a notification flying across my screen that tells me so-and-so just tagged me in a photo, right? So the web is a bit more casual, definitely in terms of the language that's used, than more traditional print, right? And that's because the web has democratized access to information, right? Back in the day, like way back in the day, who had books? Only the wealthy people. Why? Yeah, they controlled the source of knowledge, but they also were the only ones who were educated to read, right? So they, first of all, had to have money to go to school and learn how to read. And then they had to have access to books or the ability to buy books. And for that reason, writing used to take on a very high level of vocabulary and tone and cadence, and was very structured and very poetic and all of these things, because you had to be extremely educated in order to be able to read or have access to books. But because the web has democratized access to information, like you have people all over the world in all kinds of cultures at all levels of education who need to be able to access information or services, and the web has come as an amazing resource for that. But you'll notice, and like I don't know if any of you have taken a look at the Writing for the Web Linda yet, but it's written at a lower grade level. Like many things are written at a lower grade level online, because you aren't just getting like educated college graduates who are trying to access this. You might have a third grader trying to do a book report, right? Because that third grader can no longer get everything they need at the print copies at the local library. They're doing their research online. And so maybe it's written in a way that a third grader or a PhD student can access that information. So in that sense, it has very much democratized, access for all of us. I think the web is the future, obviously, as we continue to move away from printed resources, but I also think print will continue to be around. And not only am I saying this from my own kind of perspective and need for print, but because the online environment is so rich in stimulus, that a lot of people do not like to read, like we just highlighted, online. And so you can't have a super intense, focused area of study if you can't concentrate on something. And if you can't concentrate on something because there's too much, too many notifications, too many videos popping up, too many ads, too many of these things, then the web is not going to be a great environment for which to educate, people who need like a lot of education to do their jobs, like doctors. Like you just wouldn't want somebody who all they did was like got their med degree online, right? So I think that it's both. Both of them are our future, but it's important to recognize the different inherent opportunities and challenges with these different mediums, right? Okay. So with all of that stuff in mind, like I share all of this stuff with you because this is meant to inform the choices that you make. This activity of creating a website for Real Deal Tacos is not just about making something that looks pretty. It's about making something that makes sense and making something that functions well for the intended target audience, right? So these are some of my best practices for developing content. Less is more. You really want to embrace this medium, this interactive medium. And you do this. This is kind of the summary part of a lot of the things that we talked about here today. You want to be concise with your content. You want to not bury it in dense paragraphs of text. You want to provide intuitive navigational systems whereby the way you are labeling something makes sense for what it is that I'm looking for. For instance, I'm not going to know to find the menu on Real Deal Tacos if you call that page services. That's just not an intuitive leap for me, right? If you just have a contact page, I might not know that the locations are listed there every day. I might not. What would be a more intuitive way that you could make sure that I knew that? Think about that and make sure it's in your design. There are the formatting considerations we talked about, F-shaped patterns, headings, subheadings, bulleted lists. There are the idea that this is a very rich environment that can leverage multimedia resources. So, do you need 2 paragraphs of text to convey the same thing that just one amazing image is going to do, or an icon? How can you make this more visual? How can you use not just your words and your imagery, but your textures, your colors, your video in these particular sites, right? So multimedia resources. And then the other last point to make is that the web is basically the grand sum total of human knowledge, right? That we can very quickly find information about this or that from very credible sources, right? So instead of providing everything that anybody ever needed to know about this subject on the Real Deal Taco site, feel free to link out to a more credible authority where appropriate, right? So for example, they are really big on organic food, right? And they can, highlight or promote that they use that. And they could, maybe even link to some of their providers, maybe their local farms, say this is where we get our lettuce and tomatoes, or this is where we're getting, our fish from. Maybe they even put a link out to like the, leading organic research that's out there or something if they want to. But the point is they don't have to put all of that on their own site, right? Because they're for fish tacos, not for like touting the latest research on organic produce. Does that make sense? You give your audience the opportunity to learn more if they want, but you're not giving them an obstacle to what they're really there for, which is this tres leche, it's gluten-free? Probably not, because that's cake, you guys. All right, so heads up, this is what we've got going on this week. You have your writing for the web, Linda Tonight. So that's a short one. And I have just these 2 short Lindas, the one you saw last week and this week. And I think they're really great, you guys. Like, I think that these really lend to the conversations that we're having in this class. I ask you to watch this and then develop 2 pieces of content for Real Deal Tacos based upon the concepts and techniques discussed in the tutorial. So it's not just your certificate that I'm looking for here. It is a demonstration of what you learned from the tutorial. right? Later on this week, you have your content management systems analysis. This is where I ask you to go out and take a look at a number of different content management systems: Wix, Weebly, WordPress, Squarespace, Muse, Dreamweaver, whatever it is that you want to build this site with. And I ask you to make a selection and commit to it at this point. I ask you to go ahead and put a logo in the header. You give me a few pages in the navigation structure, put a disclaimer in the footer. And the reason why I do this is because most people are surprised at how long it takes to get up to speed with different content management systems. And I don't want you guys on Sunday night at 6 p.m. to start this activity where you're having to build a site for Real Deal Tacos and get, pretty flustered at the fact that it's going to take you way longer than you thought to learn how to navigate this content management system. This is me forcing your hand to get started early. Most students actually think that it's kind of fun once they get started, and when I go and check their work, I see that they've done way more than I ever asked them to do on this, right? I just don't want there to be any surprises for you. I'm giving you the heads up now. People say it takes longer than they thought, right? And then last but not least, you've got your Real Deal site launch, which is due on Sunday. Now, I realize that for maybe some of you online, this might be the first website that you've ever built. I did a poll in class before this recording, and everybody here has either done something on a content management system or some sort of portfolio work already. So chances are there might be a little bit of experience that can kind of help get you started here. But if this is your first website, please know that this is a starting point, that you will have the opportunity to revise the design that you create in week 4 based on some really detailed feedback that I will be providing you on your submission, right? And so that Real Deal Taco site is due Sunday night. Now, this is not no under construction pages, no coming soon. This is the complete site that's going to be due. Next week, in week 3, we change gears. It's like bye-bye Real Deal Tacos and hello personal portfolio sites. And then I ask you in 1 week to do what I asked you to do in 2 weeks at the start of the class, which is give me a draft of that portfolio site. But here's the cool thing, guys. Like, the more that you do this, the faster and faster that you will become, right? Like, you're not going to need to spend a lot of time teaching yourself how to use these content management systems because you'll know, right? And the amount of time that it took you to build a Real Deal Taco site, it will likely take you half that amount of time to put something together for your portfolio. Does anybody have any questions about the information that was shared here today? All right, so with that, I'm going to end this lecture. Thank the online listeners for their attention to this. And if you guys have any questions online, make sure you post those in our class messaging thread where I can answer the question in a way that benefits the entire group. Thanks, guys.